100,000 cold cases in the United States. They won't be solved with CODIS alone.
In December of 1982, somebody was essentially a dog had brought Bone back to the owner, his owner, and the owner went into the woods and found a set of bones over there in the Stone Mountain, Georgia area. It was a heavily wooded area at the time. And of course, they contacted the police. It was within Gwinnett County Police Department's jurisdiction. So we headed out there, and of course, I wasn't there. But we processed the crime scene. And essentially, during the processing of the crime scene, they had found the skull and most of the bones, albeit they were scattered about. They found some twine or rope that had loops tied in it. And they were around actually part of the leg bone. So the GBI was, at the time, was contacted to come out there and try to do to get an idea of estimated time of death. They said it was 6 to 10 years. We're trying to get a little bit of an idea of who it is. It was a female. Through forensic anthropology, they determined it was an African-American female.
It's very hard to estimate biogeographical origins just from anthropological data alone, particularly in the forensic cases where you don't necessarily have the entire skeleton. Sometimes you don't even have the entire skulls. You've got fragments of bone.
In this case, the biogeographical identity of this woman was incorrectly assigned by anthropologists, and that led to not being able to provide a good investigation or a complete investigation into who she might be.
There was a little bit of ambiguity on the anthropological side, and that combined with some of the circumstantial details noted about the case, they had rendered this unidentified woman as a woman of African origins, and so they said, we're looking for a black female, and knowing that the artist rendered the image as such, but as it turned out, she ended up being a multi-generational white person. And so you can imagine that if you can't properly describe what someone looks like, that's going to throw a big wrench in being able to identify them. They were using the wrong image.
On a law enforcement perspective, the detectives were already behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because now they have a female they believe to be a black female. So the next thing that they do is, hey, okay, the surrounding jurisdiction, and they look in our jurisdiction, are there any missing black females? And they go back many years to try to find that out. And of course they find them, but it's really, they're looking down the wrong road. So fast forward to about 2019, I come back up to the homicide unit. I have a little bit of a curiosity about these unidentified victims. And of course, with DNA technology being, I guess, exploding exponentially by the month. I mean, and it's still happening today. I'm thinking there's a possibility we might be able to identify this victim, because the first part of solving a case is to find out who the victim is. If you don't know who the victim is, you're not going to find a suspect. So we start doing that, and I reach out to the FBI, of course, and try to utilize some of their technology, and actually had sent this skull up there for them to see what they could get out of it. Now, they were able to get some DNA, but it wasn't sufficient enough for them. So they were going to put it in, I guess, in line to have next generation sequencing done, which is a type of DNA technology. And the FBI was digging into that. But in the interim, they had mentioned, hey, you might have some luck with some private labs, because of course they use private labs as well. And that's how Othram came about.
This was a case of an unidentified female that they had been working on for a number of years, and it didn't have any good leads. In fact, as we started doing the DNA analysis, we noticed that the biogeographical information was pointing us that this individual was a Caucasian person, female, Caucasian female, where in all their write-ups and anthropology reports to date, it had been an African-American female. And so that was one piece of information we were able to give Brian pretty early on in our analysis, that, as you can imagine, if they spent years trying to locate a missing African-American woman and now they know that it's a Caucasian woman, that changes who they're going to be talking to, who they're going to be trying to go get information from.
I get a call from, I believe it was David Middleman. He works for Othram, and he said, "Hey, listen, we got a match," and he provided me with an email of this individual, and I immediately emailed the individual to get more information, and she said yes, indeed, she said that, I said, "There's no doubt, genetically, that you are related to these remains that we had found back in 1982.
Being able to understand who she actually was and giving her an identity actually connected this case to a potential serial killer in the area, because now she fit the profile of the type of woman that serial killer was going after at the time in the area.
Where she was located in Stone Mountain, Georgia, there was another female that was located not far from her. And this other female, her name was Brenda Watson, and she was murdered by an individual by the name of James Willie Brown in 1975. He was subsequently arrested. He had confessed to it. He was adjudicated, found guilty, and he was sentenced to death, and it was carried out in November of 2004, I think it was.
And that's why it's so important. It's so important to look at this DNA and capture all of the information as early as possible in the investigation, because you may be going down the wrong road or looking at the wrong leads or disconnecting two crimes because they don't look like they could potentially be related, but they are. And that's I think, the power of DNA. DNA gives you exact information. And whereas anthropological methods and dental records and looking at something, possible morphology of faces, those are not exact sciences. They could look like that. And some of the times they're very close and they're able to help solve a case. But DNA will give you the answer directly. It will tell you that biogeographical identity 100%. It will give you where this person tethers in a family tree, and then you can figure out exactly who they were and what they looked like.
The mystery of a mother of two finally solved decades later. Her now grown daughter is at peace finding out Gwinnett County Police have just matched the daughter's DNA with unidentified human remains found in some woods nearly 40 years ago. Police say the mother had been murdered.
So I started talking to the victim, Marlene's daughter. Her name is Janis. And I said, kind of tell me what was going on with your mom at that time. She said, well, I was really young. I don't know much. But the story was that she was in Piedmont Park and she ran off with some men. That's the story. And it's interesting enough, Marlene was a white female. She's Caucasian. And so basically, James Willie Brown's MO was that was his hunting ground. And that's where he ended up getting Brenda Watson back in 75. So given the location and some of the physical evidence we had found at the scene and where Marlene frequented it, we assumed that probably she was a victim of James Willie Brown.
Another part of this story that is I think important to note is that there was a family left behind that thought that their mother had run away. These children were told that their mother ran away and left them because she didn't want to be in their life, and they felt abandoned their entire life. And by being able to identify her, we were able to provide them some closure. They understood that their mom never left them. Their mom was actually a murder victim, and that she never went missing by her own will, and she would have never abandoned them. And I think that provided closure that was much needed in order to move forward.
It's just a really wild story to be told basically that you were abandoned your whole life, but then find out that she probably was protecting us from this guy who ended up taking her.
you want to learn more, come to DNAsolves.com, DNASolves.com. There's cases that need funding support. You can donate your DNA to help solve the next crime, or you can share some of the stories that we've announced with law enforcement.